active within your organization, or you see a coworker taking a shortcut that could be a safety hazard. How do you handle this? They're very pressured questions, but they see how someone would react. Most common interview mistakes: people might dress inappropriately, arrive late, they might chew gum during the interview, bring food or a drink. They might not know anything about the company that they're coming into, which is a big flaw because you need to know about the company before you interview with them. You might be unclear on your resume. Make sure you know all the details of the resume. Pay attention during your interview. Don't talk too much. Be prepared to answer the questions they're going to ask, and especially don't burn your bridges by bad-mouthing past employers, because you never know when you're going to need a reference. My new and you is when I interviewed for Victoria's Secret, which is part of Limited Brands LLC. I had a structured group interview. There was me and another candidate. They wanted to see how we would respond to each other answering the same questions. So next up we have John DuPont. He's going to be talking about reference and background checks.
Hi, I'm John DuPont. I'm going to be talking about reference and background checks, like Lindsay just said. So what is a reference check? A reference check is pretty much a candidate's past job history. Since past performance is the best predictor of future performance, reference checks have become more popular in organizations. In fact, 96% of organizations now conduct reference checks. How do you conduct a reference check? Most of the time it's done over the phone. That way it's convenient for both sides, but you still get to have that conversation with the person, get to know them. Sometimes it can be done over fax or the internet or mail, and very rarely it's actually ever done face-to-face. Who's responsible for these reference checks? The HR staff is responsible 2/3 of the time, which makes sense because we're in an HR class. And the other third of the time, it's the hiring agency or an outside agency that will come and actually conduct the reference checks for the company. Training for reference checks. Only about half of HR professionals actually conduct training for reference checks. This training can be very crucial to help bring better awareness to what questions to ask, what questions not to ask, and how to spot red flags on what's a positive or negative answer in the reference check. Who to get the reference checks from? Most employers today are very hesitant to actually give information in fear of being sued. They only tell you the dates of employment and the jobs being held, but there are other people you can ask. You can either ask previous supervisor, most appropriately one that doesn't work with the candidate anymore. You can also ask former co-workers, and even previous clients or customers can give you valuable information to help you during the hiring process. The type of information checked would be, are you eligible to work in the U.S.? They might check your driving record, your criminal record, your credit check. They might check your education history, your job history, maybe the past salaries you have, or even check for malpractice or disciplinary action. The most common information asked on a reference check would be your former employers, your dates of employment, and even your former job titles, which makes sense because this is the information I said that employers will give you without fear of being sued. The least common information that will be asked is your former job responsibilities, your education and former degrees, and also past salaries. The past salaries is least important because most organizations already have a set range of what they're going to pay you. Some information is very specific to the job that you're applying for. For instance, they're only going to ask for a driving record check if you're going to be a truck driver or a traveling salesman, and they may only check for your malpractice and disciplinary action if you're going to be something like an attorney or a doctor, where moral values are very important. There was a study for what was the most accurate information given, and dates of employment was the most accurate with 66%. Other things that were very accurate were the eligibility for rehire, job performance, the quality of the employer, and work ethic. The most accurate information given was malpractice or disciplinary action, bizarre threats of behaviors, overall personality, and reason for leaving previous employer, which these all have to do with somebody's character, which shows that people being interviewed will actually lie to make somebody's personality sound a lot better. There's also tests to show how effective reference checks are at identifying poor performers, and the biggest response was 55% said it was somewhat effective, but overall 75% said it was effective in some way. Legal precautions: you have to have a set idea of what questions you're going to ask during the reference check. You want to make sure you don't ask questions on very sensitive subjects like race or marital status that could bring up discrimination cases. The negatives of reference checks: they're very unreliable in projecting future success in the job. This is because a lot of interviewers will either overinflate positives or downplay negatives. Instead of saying somebody is a good worker, they might say they're a great worker, they're always there on time, and they have great quality work. What reference checks will do is they'll eliminate people with negative feedback, or people that are dishonest. Say you ask somebody in the interview what they did and they said that they were a head manager at a store, but then you reference check the store owner and they say that they were just an assistant manager and they were a lazy worker, you can automatically eliminate that person. Nowadays, a lot of people are moving towards background checks because they're more broad. Instead of just talking about somebody's job performance, they'll also talk about who they are as a person. With the advances in web-friendly databases, it's become a lot easier to find out somebody's job history, and also then go check your social media and maybe even see who you are as a person, who you hang out with, and what you do with your time. And this could cause a problem for job seekers with bad records, like criminal records, because it'll be easily accessed on the internet. My new and you, I never actually had a background or reference check, but my older brother a couple years ago went to apply for an apartment, and he had the down payments and everything, but they did a background check and found out that he was in drug court not too long ago, and they actually denied him just because they were fearing that he'd end up bringing drugs onto the premises. And next we got Greg Stevens with the selection decision.
Hey everybody, I'm Greg. I'm going to do the selection decision. Well, what is selection? It's the process of obtaining information from the applicant for the best position for a group or organization. The important process of selection. There are basics, there's selection criteria, costs, and legal concerns. The HR selection process is a strategically planned thing done by HR professionals. The implementation organization is for recruiting, hiring, and bringing on new employees. The process typically begins when the jobs are posted internally or externally. Recruiting tools are used. HR hiring managers and have developed tools for the screening, such as applications, interviews, tests, and reference and background checks. The selection criteria, that's the standard against which everyone is compared to see whether they fit the job that they're applying for. Some examples of selection interview are your effective oral or written communication, how well you can communicate back what you're being told, and the ability to read and write. Demonstration, you have to demonstrate your ability, you understand the concept and the information being told to you, and you got to be able to give it back to the people that you're over. Some of the costs of the selection cost is the money's used to replace current or employees in the position. Either it's usually high for external and low for internal. Advertising is one of the biggest costs in advertising for selection, and time, because it takes your people away from what they're doing, and you have to lost productivity. This can happen during, before, during, and after the process, and cross-training and current new employees. It would replacement costs are advertising, pre-employment testing, time and materials, training costs or time and materials for your trainers and supervisors, and your productivity costs. The benefits of HR management for the law is they are influenced by the state and federal laws governing all employees. Regulations and laws govern all aspects. Some legal concerns, non-discrimination and equal employment opportunity protects race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, age, and disability. The freedom to join or not join a union, they have regulations for that too. It protects your right to talk to employers through a union or to not join a union, and there are laws for that. There are minimum standards acts that your employer has to pay you the right amount of money, your safety and employee leave if you ever have to leave work for any reason. Then there's the Privacy Act. Most of the time, you do not have privacy while at work, but there are acts that protect you from things like that, like the Electronic Communications Privacy Act and the Fair Credit Reporting Act. My new and you is, my last job, I was a store manager for Dollar General, and I was tasked with hiring the needs for the store. After a dozen applications, I narrowed it down to 3 and finally picked one of the applications. And the things that made me choose that person were the attire, how they spoke to me. They arrived in a timely manner, and they were always persistent to call and look for the job to make sure that they were in line to get it. So I went over selection, the basics of it, the criteria for selection, some of the costs related, and some of the legal concerns for the selection process. And now here's Ryan with job offer and final selection.
Thank you, Greg. As he said, my name is Ryan Clore, and I'm going to be discussing the job offer and the final selection. Okay, so some of the things that I'm going to talk about on my agenda today is selecting the candidate for the position, initiating the job offer, negotiating the offer, finalizing the offer, whether that be accepting or rejecting the offer, evaluating the selection process, and then I'm going to go over my new and you. So to start off, when you're making the decision for the candidate, you have to determine the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed for the job, and you have to identify the reliable methods to select a candidate and make sure that you're not discriminating against any candidate throughout this process. The job analysis is the first step in all of this. It determines what the major duties and responsibilities of the job are, and the organization determines the important dimensions of job performance and what the necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities are. When selecting a candidate, you would select based on the selection tests, the employment interview, the reference and background checks, and the candidates obviously have to have the KSAs that are needed for the job, or else they won't be a good candidate. When selecting a candidate, again, they have to have the matching requirements in the KSAs. Their interview performance has to be satisfactory, as well as their references. They have to pass a background check, and the employer has to feel that the candidate will be successful in the future. The person-job fit and person-organization fit. The person-job fit is the compatibility between the individual and the job they'll be performing. Person-organization fit is compatibility between the individual and the organization that they'll be working for. After the right candidate has been chosen, that is when there will be a formal offer of employment that comes along. That offer will include the job title, the starting date and salary, some of the benefits, and a detailed confirmation of the job offer. When initiating the offer, you would either do this by phone, through letter, or in person, where you'll be called back to actually accept the job that way. And all of the candidates who do not get the job will be notified in one of these forms as well. Initiating the offer, you can discuss the salary and benefits with the selected candidates, but don't quote an actual salary, because if you do and you're wrong, there can be legal action that could be a repercussion of that. And you need to make arrangements for a physical exam and a drug exam, because your employment could be contingent on that. When negotiating the offer, candidates are not required to accept a job offer once it's been given to them. They do have room to negotiate things like salary or benefits. And oftentimes hiring managers expect candidates to ask for more money, and sometimes there's some wiggle room in there where they can give it. After negotiations are complete, the candidate can decide whether they want to accept or reject the offer, and if they accept, this is when the formal contract of employment will come into play. Rejecting the offer, again, candidates are not required to accept the offer. Some of the reasons, the more common reasons why candidates might refuse is because they received another offer, the compensation and benefits were not up to their standard, or they received another offer such as a promotion from the company that they're already working in. When rejecting the offer, candidates cannot be retaliated for rejecting the offer. They can't be discriminated against if they want to apply again. It might end up hurting them, but they have the right to say no. And the position can be offered to a previous candidate that was turned down. You are also allowed to back out of an offer once you've accepted it and then decide that you don't want it, but the HR department is essentially starting over in their selection process. backing out of a job offer is definitely not something that you should do. It's not advisable. You're